Welcome back, my friend. The lamps are lit, the wind has quieted, and somewhere in the shadows the Niffler has found something shiny again. But this time, it's not gold. It's a story. And tonight, he's ready to share it with you. So settle in and listen closely. It begins like this.
October fog wrapped itself around Hogwarts like a shroud, transforming the castle into a ghostly ship sailing through a sea of milky grey. Professor Sybill Trelawney stood by the North Tower window, gazing at a world dissolving into mist. Her reflection in the fogged glass seemed alien, a woman with enormous spectacles that magnified her eyes to unwavering proportions, swathed in shawls like a cocoon against reality. A 3-year professor of divination. A 3-year fraud. She turned from the window and looked at the 7th year settled around the low tables in her stuffy, perfumed classroom. The red light from the lamps turned their faces into masks: youth, confidence, futures. Everything she no longer possessed. "Today, my dears," she said in a voice that echoed like a whisper from beyond, "we shall continue our study of mirror scrying. Who can remind me what makes mirrors such powerful conduits between worlds?" Theodore Ashmore, a tall Ravenclaw youth with sharp features and piercing grey eyes, raised his hand almost immediately. Of course he did. Always first, always cleverest, always the most dangerous kind of student, the one who actually believed. "Mirrors hold reflections of reality, Professor Trelawney," he said with that certainty which was both captivating and troubling. "They show not only what is, but what might be. Ancient seers believed mirrors to be cracks between time, through which one might glimpse past and future simultaneously." 10 points to Ravenclaw, Mr. Ashmore, Sybill nodded, her necklace of countless glass beads jangling. "Though of course not all of us possess the gift to see through these cracks." She felt her voice break on the final word, cracks. How many cracks were there in her own life? How many times had she looked through them and seen what she should not have seen? "And what does Mr. Stowens think?" she asked, trying to focus. "Edmund, you're so confident in your scientific approach to magic. What do you make of mirror scrying?" Edmund Stownes, a solidly built Hufflepuff with chestnut hair and earth-honest eyes, looked up from the parchment where he'd been sketching something instead of listening. "Honestly, Professor," he scratched the back of his head, "I reckon most of it's just tricks of light and shadow. Our brains see patterns where there aren't any. Like looking at clouds and seeing dragons." Several students sniggered. Sybill forced herself to smile, broadly, theatrically, as they expected of her. "Ah, Mr. Stearns. Skepticism is wonderful, but remember, those who refuse to see often remain blind to what matters most. Now then," she clapped her hands together, "take your hand mirrors. Today we shall attempt to glimpse reflections of what lies hidden." The students hastily extracted small mirrors with copper frames. Sybill distributed a candle to each. "Light your candle," she instructed. "Look into the mirror but not at your own reflection. Look through it, search for movement where there should be none. Listen to the silence between your heartbeats." She walked between the tables, her shawls rustling across the floor. Theodore stared into his mirror with such intensity it seemed he was trying to burn a hole through it by sheer force of will. Edmund held his mirror an angle, studying the fire's reflection, obviously seeking a physical explanation for anything he might see. Sybill stopped by her own desk. Her own large mirror in its massive silver frame sat upon a velvet cushion. She always tried not to look into it for too long. Mirrors remember. They know. But now, in the classroom's red light, amidst the scent of incense and old parchment, something compelled her to glance. Just for a moment. Just a quick look. And then she saw it. At first, merely a tremor in the reflection, as though the mirror's surface had become water. Then a face. Not her own. A woman's face, pale as death, with eyes wide in silent scream, lips moving, forming words that had no sound, hands reaching towards her through the silver surface, fingers curled in a pleading gesture. Pain struck Sybill's temples, the familiar, terrible sensation when a true vision breaks through her carefully constructed walls. She grabbed the desk's edge, trying not to cry out. The world tilted, red light turning to blood, and for one endless moment, she was not in the classroom but in darkness, surrounded by mirrors reflecting infinite corridors of pain. "Professor Trelawney?" Theodore's voice came from far away. "Are you quite all right?" Sybill blinked. The classroom swam back into focus. Students stared at her with expressions mixing curiosity and concern. She looked down at the mirror. There was only her own reflection, paler than usual, pupils dilated. Yes, of course." She waved a hand across her chest, transforming panic into theatricality. "Simply, a very strong aura today. The planets have aligned in a particular manner. Mars is especially bright. It always signifies, unrest." She saw Edmund roll his eyes. Theodore leaned forward, his gaze growing sharper. "You saw something, didn't you?" he asked quietly. "In the mirror, a true vision." "Don't be absurd, Mr. Ashmore," she replied more sharply than intended. "I was merely demonstrating how easily one might mistake a reflection for a vision. Caution, my dears, caution. That's what's needed in this art." But her hands trembled as she covered the mirror with velvet cloth. "Exercise concluded," she announced. "Homework, an essay on 3 types of mirror visions, 24 inches of parchment. You may leave." Students began gathering their belongings. Theodore lingered, staring at the covered mirror, then at Sybill, but eventually departed with the others. Edmund shot her a sympathetic look. He thought her eccentric, but not unkind, and that was almost worse than contempt. When the door closed behind the last student, Sybill sank into a chair and tore off her spectacles. Her hands still trembled. She knew what she should do. Should ignore this. Should pretend nothing had happened. That's what she'd been doing these past 3 years. Hiding behind sherry and theatrical prophecies. Building walls around her gift. Turning herself into a caricature. But the woman's face in the mirror, that silent scream, she couldn't ignore it. Not entirely. Sybill stood, wrapped herself in shawls and hurried to her chambers. She needed sherry. Now. Her rooms were situated in the North Tower's highest part. A small world smelling of lavender, old books, and alcohol. Windows looked out in all 4 directions, and on clear days one could see far beyond the forbidden forest. But today fog transformed the world into grey emptiness. Sybill poured herself a large glass of sherry, and drank half in one gulp. Warmth spread through her chest, but brought none of the calm she'd hoped for. She poured more. The mirror on the wall, old, Venetian, with a crack in the upper left corner, reflected her figure. She forced herself not to look at it too long. But even as she turned away, she thought something moved at the periphery of the reflection. She approached the window, pressing the glass to her chest. Below, through fog, she could see vague outlines of the castle. Towers, spires, bridges between buildings. Hogwarts was her sanctuary, a place where she could hide from the world, from herself, from what had happened. 3 years ago. The memory came uninvited, as always. She tried to push it away, but sherry had weakened her defenses, and the pain in her temples, reminder of the vision, had opened doors to the past. Winter, 1980. A small flat in London, above a potions shop. She was younger then, her eyes not yet hidden behind enormous spectacles. Thomas Harrington, a tall man with warm brown eyes and hands that were always warm, even on the coldest day, sat opposite her. "Sybill, you've seen something again," he said. Not a question, a statement. He always knew. "It doesn't mean anything," she replied, but her voice broke. "Thomas, they're just images. They're not always true. Your visions are always true." He took her hand. "That's why you fear them. What did you see?" She didn't want to tell him. Wanted to change the future, simply by remaining silent. But the vision burned in her mind like a brand on skin. "Something terrible is going to happen," she whispered. "A boy. A small boy who will survive where he shouldn't. A dark wizard, the most terrible of all. He will fall. But not forever. It's only the beginning." Thomas released her hand. His face became serious, the face of an auror who'd just received an assignment. "Where? When?" "Thomas, no." She grabbed his hand. "Don't go, please. I saw darkness. Blood. If you go. If I don't go, And someone dies whom I could have saved? He stood, kissed her forehead. This is my job, Sybill. You see, I act. Together we make a difference. But they didn't make a difference. He left that very night, part of a group of Aurors dispatched to Godric's Hollow on information she had provided. He was caught there, trapped by Death Eaters awaiting reinforcements. He died, protecting a young couple with a child, the Potters, as she later learned. Voldemort fell that night, just as she'd foreseen. The boy survived. Her beloved did not. Sybill drained the sherry and poured more. Her hand shook so violently, the bottle clinked against the glass's rim. She wasn't to blame. She'd repeated it to herself 1,000 times. She'd only seen. She hadn't forced him to go. He'd made the choice. But hadn't she made that choice possible? Hadn't her vision become the weapon that killed him, as surely as any spell? After that, she'd sworn to herself. Never again. Her gift died with Thomas. She would become what they expected of her, a charlatan, an eccentric professor, who saw death in tea leaves and grims around every corner. No one would suffer from her visions if she never told the truth. Dumbledore knew, of course. He'd hired her after that prophecy, not because she was a good teacher, but because he understood she needed sanctuary. He never asked about true visions. He simply knew, and allowed her to play her role. But today, a knock at the door made her jump. Sherry spilled on her shawl. "Professor Trelawney?" The headmaster's voice was gentle but held unshakable confidence. "Might I have a word?" Of course he knew. He always knew. Sybill opened the door. Albus Dumbledore stood in the corridor, tall and calm, his long silver beard gleaming even in dim light. His blue eyes behind half-moon spectacles regarded her with that particular mixture of kindness and penetration that always made her want simultaneously to cry and hide. "Headmaster," she nearly stumbled over her own shawls, stepping back. "I wasn't expecting." "Forgive me for calling unannounced." He entered, his robes rustling across floor. "I noticed you seemed somewhat troubled after your class. I wondered if all was well." She could lie, should lie, but instead she simply laughed quietly, a bitter, weary sound. "You know all isn't well, Albus," she said, using his first name, something she rarely did. "You always know." He didn't deny it. Instead he approached the window, gazing at the fog. "Hogwarts is an old place," he said thoughtfully. "It remembers. Sometimes, I think, it tries to tell us what it knows, but we don't always wish to listen." "I don't wish to listen," Sybill said sharply. "I made a vow, never again." "I know." His voice was full of compassion. "And I respect your choice, Sybill. You have the right to live as you see fit. Your gift belongs to you, not to me or anyone else." She felt tension ease slightly from her shoulders, but then he added, "Though I must ask, if you saw something today, something real, would it be a warning of danger?" She turned to him. His face was serious. "I don't know," she admitted. "It was a face. A woman." She was screaming but soundlessly. She was reaching towards me through the mirror. She paused, then more quietly. It felt old. Very old. Not like danger coming. Like pain that already was. Dumbledore nodded slowly. "Curious," he murmured. "The North Tower has many stories, some of them I suspect not yet told to their end." "What do you mean?" "Nothing specific as yet." He smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "But if you see anything more, Sybill, if you feel someone trying to reach you, please come to me. Not so I might ask you to use your gift. Simply so you need not be alone." He placed a hand on her shoulder, brief, warm touch, and left. Sybill stood in the room's center, staring at the closed door. Her sherry glass was empty. She looked at the Venetian mirror on the wall. In the crack, barely visible, something gleamed. Perhaps merely a reflection of light. Or something else. The next 2 days passed in anxious normality. Sybill taught her classes, made theatrical prophecies, drank sherry, and tried not to look in mirrors. But the fog didn't lift, and something in Hogwarts' air felt wrong. Like a string stretched too tightly. Students felt it too. She saw it in their faces, the way they looked around in corridors, as though expecting something to leap from shadows. Theodore Ashmore became even more obsessed with his research, constantly scribbling in a small black notebook. Edmund Storms, conversely, grew irritable, snapping at friends without cause. On the third day, Sybill was walking down the corridor to her tower when she heard voices, students, excited, frightened. She stopped at a corner, listening. It was unwise, but she was curious. "I'm telling you, Theo, something's not right there," a girl's voice, young and trembling. Sybill recognized it. Ivy Tremble, a fifth-year Hufflepuff, a quiet girl with chestnut hair and large dark eyes. "Of course there's something there," Theodore replied, his voice ringing with barely contained excitement. "That's what I've been saying all along. The North Tower's the castle's oldest part. If there are magical artifacts anywhere, it's there." "This isn't about artifacts, Theo," Edmund interrupted, his voice low and serious. "Ivy's right. Something's wrong. My father worked with stone all across Britain, and he always told me, old buildings can hold memories, sometimes ill memories." "Your father's a stonemason, Eddie, not a wizard." Theodore spoke with patience that was actually the opposite of patience. "And we're talking about magic, not, what, cursed brick?" "I'm just saying you should be careful," Edmund insisted. "You always think you can figure everything out, understand any magic. But some things are better left alone." "How can you call yourself a Ravenclaw?" Theodore scoffed. "Knowledge is power, understanding is protection. Ignoring something because it's frightening is the path to catastrophe. And barging into something without understanding the danger is the path to death." Edmund replied evenly. Brief silence. "Ivy." Theodore changed tactics, his voice softening. "What exactly did you see in that tower?" Ivy hesitated. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I don't know. I just got lost. You know how it is in Hogwarts. You turn the wrong corner, and suddenly you're in a place you've never been before. I found myself at old stairs leading up. They looked forgotten, like no one had walked them in years." "And you climbed them?" Theodore prompted. "Yes, I don't know why, I just felt I should." At the top was a room, small, circular. There were mirrors. So many mirrors, all different. Old, new, large, small, some broken. They stood around the room like someone had been collecting them. "What did you see in them?" Theodore's voice almost trembled with tension. "Nothing at first. Only my own reflection. But then..." Ivy paused, and Sybill heard the girl swallow. "The reflections started moving. Not the way they should. I turned my head left, but my reflection turned right. I raised my hand, and it just stood there. And then I saw her." "Her?" "Edmund. A woman. In the mirror behind me. She was pale like a ghost, but not transparent. Her hair was long, dark. She was staring right at me. Her lips were moving, like she was trying to say something, but there was no sound. And then she reached out her hand. Towards me. Through the mirror." "And?" Theodore pressed. "And I screamed and ran," Ivy said almost angrily. Which, I think, was a perfectly reasonable reaction to a ghost climbing out of a mirror. "But it wasn't a ghost." Theodore spoke slowly, considering. "Ghosts can't be in mirrors. They're residues of magic, tied to places, not objects. What you saw is something else." "Whatever it was, it frightened me," Ivy said firmly. "And I'm not going back there. You shouldn't either, Theo." "On the contrary," Theodore replied, and Sybill could hear the smile in his voice. "Now I absolutely must go. This could be the greatest discovery in Hogwarts history. Or the greatest mistake," Edmund muttered. Sybill stepped back from the corner, her heart beating too quickly. The North Tower, mirrors. A woman with long dark hair reaching through reflections. The same face she'd seen. She hurried to her room, locked the door, and leaned against it, trying to catch her breath. This couldn't be coincidence. Whatever was in that room, it was trying to reach out, not just to her. She approached her desk and unrolled a map of Hogwarts, an old yellowed thing showing some corridors that no longer existed and rooms that had been sealed for centuries. Her fingers trembled as she searched for the North Tower. There, at the very top, a small circular room, marked in pale ink. No name, no notes, just an empty circle. Why had she never noticed this before? Sybill knew what she should do. Go to Dumbledore, tell him about the conversation she'd overheard, about students poking into dangerous places. That would be the right thing, the responsible thing. But if she did, he'd have to ask why she cared, and then she'd have to admit she'd seen this woman too, that her gift had awakened again, despite all her efforts to silence it. She poured herself sherry, but the glass stopped halfway to her lips. In the Venetian mirror on the wall, something flashed. Not a reflection. Something behind the reflection. Sybill slowly set down the glass and approached the mirror. Her own face stared back. Paler, more tired, older than she wanted to admit. But behind it, in the silver surface's depths, movement, shadow. A shape that could almost be a woman. "What do you want?" Sybill whispered to the mirror. "Why won't you leave me alone?" No answer, only silence and her own reflection, staring back with eyes full of fear. That evening, when the castle slept beneath heavy fog, Theodore Ashmore slipped from his dormitory. He had a map, compiled from fragments of library information, details heard from ghosts, observations of the castle's architecture. He knew where that room was. Knew how to get there. Edmund had tried to stop him, of course. Good-natured, overly practical Eddie, who never understood the true value of knowledge. But Theodore was cleverer. He waited until Edmund fell asleep before slipping out. Hogwarts corridors at night were different. Shadows living their own lives, portraits whispering to each other, footsteps echoing where no one was. Theodore didn't fear darkness. He feared only ignorance, and knowledge was the cure for all fears. He found the stairs, narrow, stone, spiraling upward into the North Tower's heart. No one seemed to have used them in years. Cobwebs stretched from corner to corner, and dust lay thick on every step. Theodore climbed higher and higher, his wand light barely piercing the darkness. Finally, the stairs ended at wooden doors so old, the wood had nearly turned to stone. He pushed them. They opened with a mournful creak. The room inside was exactly as Ivy had described. Circular, small, filled with mirrors. They stood along walls, some on stands, others leaning against stone. Mirrors of all sizes and shapes, oval, rectangular, round, some in rich frames, others simply bare. Some broken, their cracks spreading like webs across surfaces. Theodore slowly entered, his wand illuminating the room in pale white light. His heart beat faster, but not from fear, from excitement. This was a treasure trove, a collection. Someone had been gathering these mirrors for centuries, perhaps. Why? He approached the nearest mirror, large, in a massive gold frame carved with mermaids and sea creatures. His reflection stared back, a tall youth with sharp features, grey eyes glinting in wandlight. Nothing unusual, just a mirror. He moved to the next, smaller, in a silver frame darkened with age. Again, only his reflection. Another, and another. All just mirrors. Disappointment began creeping into his chest. Perhaps Ivy had simply been frightened by a shadow. Perhaps her imagination had played tricks. But then he saw it. The mirror in the room's far corner, almost hidden in shadow. It was different. Its surface wasn't quite smooth, like water that had almost frozen. The frame was black, carved from something resembling obsidian, with strange symbols etched into stone. Theodore approached it, mesmerized. When he looked into it, his reflection seemed wrong, slightly blurred, slightly different, and then the reflection smiled. He wasn't smiling, but the reflection was smiling. Theodore stepped back, his breathing quickening. This was impossible. Reflections couldn't. And then he saw her. Behind his reflection, in the mirror's depths, stood a woman. She was pale, her skin wax white. Her hair was long, black, loose around shoulders. She wore a dress that looked ancient, velvet and lace, style from 5 centuries ago. Her eyes stared straight at him, and her lips moved, forming words. "Help me." Theodore couldn't breathe, couldn't move. He could only watch, as the woman extended her hand towards the mirror's surface, her fingers touching the silver from inside. "Please. He is coming, he will come for everyone." "Who?" Theodore forced himself to speak, his voice hoarse. "Who is coming?" But the woman didn't answer. Instead, her face contorted in agony, her mouth opened in soundless scream, and suddenly the mirror flashed with bright light. So bright, Theodore covered his eyes with his hands. When he lowered them, the mirror was ordinary again. The woman was gone, only his own reflection, pale and frightened. But on the mirror's surface, where her fingers had touched, were marks, like prints on fogged glass, and they were slowly fading. Theodore stood trembling, staring at the mirror. This was real, he hadn't imagined it. Someone was there, someone was in the mirror. And she was begging for help. Next morning, Sybill woke to sharp knocking at her door. Her head was splitting. Too much sherry last night, too little sleep. She pulled on a robe and, stumbling, went to the door. Minerva McGonagall stood there, her face stern. "Professor Trelawney," she said without greeting. "The headmaster wishes to see you, now." Sybill's heart froze. "What's happened?" "A student." Minerva spoke crisply, but with an undertone of concern. "Ivy Tremble, 5th year Hufflepuff. She was found this morning in one of the North Tower's old rooms. She's unconscious. Madame Pomfrey is trying to wake her, but so far without success." Sybill felt the room spin. Ivy. The girl who'd already wandered there before, who'd seen the woman in the mirror. "I'm coming immediately," she whispered. Minerva nodded and left. Sybill closed the door and leaned against it, her breathing short and sharp. It was happening again. Someone had been hurt, and this time she couldn't pretend she didn't know why. She quickly dressed, threw on her shawls, and hurried to the headmaster's office. Her mind raced. What would she tell Dumbledore? What could she say? When she climbed the spiral stairs and entered the office, Dumbledore stood by the window, gazing at fog still wrapping the castle. He turned to her, and his face's expression was serious. "Sybill," he said quietly, "thank you for coming." "What happened to the girl?" she asked. "Madame Pomfrey isn't certain." He approached his desk, gesturing for her to sit. "Physically, Miss Tremble is healthy, but her mind. Madame Pomfrey says it's like deep shock, as though she saw something so terrible her mind simply shut down." Sybill sat, her hands tightly clasped on her knees. "Where exactly was she found?" "In a room atop the North Tower." Dumbledore watched her intently. "A room filled with old mirrors. You know of it?" Sybill paused. This was the moment. She could lie. Could say she'd never heard of such a place. "I heard students talking about it a few days ago. And you didn't think it worth informing me?" "I thought it was just rumors." The answer sounded weak even to her own ears. Dumbledore was silent for a moment, then sighed quietly. "Sybill," he said gently, "I've never asked you to use your gift. I respect your pain and your desire to protect yourself. But if you know something that might help this girl, if you saw something—" "I saw a face." The words burst from her before she could stop them. "In a mirror. During class, a few days ago. A woman. She was screaming soundlessly. She was reaching towards me." Dumbledore didn't look surprised. "The same woman Miss Tremble saw, I suspect. Do you know who she is?" "I have a theory." He approached a bookshelf and extracted a thin volume bound in red velvet. "This room was sealed about 500 years ago. Records of it are very sparse, but there's mention of a woman named Lady Cassandra Windermere. She was a Royal Seer in times when magic and crown were closely intertwined. What happened to her? She made a prophecy." Dumbledore opened the book, his fingers sliding across yellowed pages. "Foretold a king's death. But she wasn't believed. They thought she was trying to frighten the court, seize power. When the king did die, exactly as she'd predicted, she was accused of conspiracy. They said she was a witch, that she'd caused the death with her curse." Sybill felt cold in her stomach. "What happened to her?" "She was burned." Dumbledore stated it simply, without embellishment. But before that, they say, a powerful wizard, perhaps one of Hogwarts' founders, though this isn't confirmed, tried to help her. He transferred part of her essence into mirrors, hoping to preserve at least her mind, her gift. But something went wrong. Instead of freeing her, he only imprisoned her there, in reflections, between worlds. "She's still there," Sybill whispered. "After all this time, she's still there." "Yes, I'm afraid so." Dumbledore closed the book. "And now, it seems, she's trying to reach someone. You, Sybill, and anyone else who has the gift to see." "Why? What does she want?" "That I don't know." He looked at her, and in his blue eyes was something like sad resolution. "But I suspect we must find out, and quickly, before anyone else gets hurt." Sybill wanted to refuse. Wanted to stand and leave, return to her sherry and the safety of her theatricality. But the image of Ivy Tremble, unconscious, her mind somewhere lost, wouldn't leave her. "What do you want me to do?" "For now, nothing." Dumbledore approached her, his voice gentle. "I'll seal that room. Put protective charms so no one else can enter. But Sybill, if you see anything more, if Lady Cassandra tries to reach you again, please come to me. We'll figure this out together." She nodded, unable to speak. As she left the office, her legs felt heavy as lead. In the corridor she nearly collided with Theodore Ashmore. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, and his usually neat hair was disheveled. "Professor Trelawney," he said, and in his voice was a note of desperation. "I need to speak with you. About the room. About what's there." She looked at him. This confident, brilliant boy who now looked frightened and lost. "Not now, Mr. Ashmore," she said wearily. "Just stay away from the North Tower, please." But even as she said it, she knew it was futile. Theodore wasn't one to heed warnings. Just like herself, once. That night Sybill couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to wind howling in towers. Fog had thickened, turning the world beyond windows into an opaque white wall. Around midnight she rose, lit a candle, and approached the Venetian mirror. She didn't know why, simply felt a pull, like a magnet drawing steel. She stared at her own reflection, an exhausted face, eyes too large behind spectacles, hair spilling across shoulders. And then, in the mirror's depths, she saw movement. The woman appeared slowly, as though surfacing from water. Her face was pale, her eyes dark and deep. She stared at Sybill, and her lips moved. "Help." Sybill felt tears fill her eyes. Not from fear, from something else, from recognition. She knew this look, knew this despair. It was the look of a woman who'd seen the future and couldn't change it. The look of a woman who'd lost everything because of her gift. Sybill reached out, her fingers touching the mirror's cold surface. "I see you," she whispered. "Cassandra, I see you." The woman in the mirror shuddered, and for a moment, just a moment, Sybill felt a connection. A flash of images, emotions, memories not her own. Pain, fire, screams no one heard, centuries of loneliness, imprisoned between reflections, always seeing, never being seen. And then something else, a warning, a vision. Darkness beneath the castle. Something ancient, something hungry. The seal weakening. He is coming. He will come for everyone. The connection broke, and Sybill stepped back from the mirror, trembling. Her heart beat so hard she felt it in her temples. Lady Cassandra wasn't just trying to escape, she was trying to warn, and Sybill, who'd hidden from her gift for 3 years, understood with terrible clarity. She would have to trust it again, trust that part of herself she feared most, because if she didn't, someone would die. Perhaps many. And this time it wouldn't be because of a prophecy she'd made, but because of a prophecy she'd failed to hear. She looked at the mirror. Cassandra was still there, barely visible in the reflection's depths. Waiting. "All right," Sybill whispered to herself, to the fate she'd tried so long to avoid. "All right, I'm listening. Tell me what I need to know." And in the Venetian mirror's crack something gleamed, not light, but hope. Sybill waited until 3 o'clock in the morning. When even Hogwarts, ghosts grew quiet, and the corridors sank into that particular silence, existing only in the deepest part of darkness. She didn't light her wand. Moonlight piercing through fog gave sufficient illumination not to break her neck on the stairs. Dumbledore had placed protective charms on the mirror room. She knew this, could feel them as she climbed the spiral staircase, a slight tingling in the air, a taste of ozone. But the protection was created to keep students out, not professors. He didn't know that she, specifically, would come here. Not yet. The door opened at her touch, and Sybill entered the room that had haunted her dreams these past 4 nights. Mirrors stood in darkness like sentinels, their surfaces reflecting moonlight through narrow windows. The air here was cold, carried the scent of old glass and something else, honey and wax like in a church. She closed the door behind her and approached the room's center. Her reflection multiplied in dozens of mirrors. So many Sybils, so many women hiding from their own gifts. "Cassandra," she whispered into silence, "I'm here. I've come, as you wanted." At first, nothing, only her own voice, echoing off stone. Then, slowly, the mirrors began to change. First one, then another, until all the reflections started moving independently of her, turning heads, raising hands, looking aside. And in the largest mirror, the one standing in the far corner with an obsidian frame, she appeared. Lady Cassandra Windermere was beautiful, even in her deathly pallor. Her face had the fine features of an aristocrat, high cheekbones, long nose, lips that probably once smiled easily. Her hair fell in dark waves to her waist, adorned with pearls and silver threads. The dress was velvet, deep burgundy with lace on the sleeves, clothing of a royal court 500 years ago, but most striking were her eyes. Dark, almost black, they gazed at Sybill with the depth of centuries, full of pain that time couldn't heal. "You came." Cassandra's voice arrived not from the mirror, but as though from inside Sybill's head, like a memory of sound. Finally, someone sees. Someone hears. "I see you." Sybill approached closer to the mirror, her hand involuntarily reaching towards the cold surface. "You're imprisoned here. For so long. 523 years, 4 months, 19 days. Cassandra spoke without emotion, but her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I counted at first, then stopped. Time is different here. It flows but doesn't move, like a river turned to ice." "What happened?" Sybill sat on the floor before the mirror, wrapping herself in her shawls. "Dumbledore told me something, but I want to hear it from you." Cassandra was silent for a long moment, gazing somewhere through Sybill, into her own painful past. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, like the whisper of dead leaves. "I was young when the gift came to me, 9 years old. My grandmother had it too, but weak. She saw only trifles, lost things, small fates. Mine was stronger. I saw deaths, battles, future kingdoms, and the ashes of empires." She paused, her fingers reaching towards the mirror's surface from inside. "King Edward, 5th of his line, heard of me. He sought a seer, someone who could guide his decisions. My family was poor, but my gift made me valuable. I was 15 when I came to court, 22 when I saw his death." "What did you see?" "Poisoning. At a feast for the winter solstice. I saw his face, turned blue, his body convulsing. I saw the chaos after, war between his sons, blood on snow." Cassandra closed her eyes. "I told him. I told everyone. I begged him to cancel the feast, change the date, check the food and drink. But he didn't believe. His advisors said I was trying to frighten him, seize power. They whispered that I was a witch, that I wanted the throne for myself, and the feast went ahead." Sybill already knew the story's end, but hearing it from Cassandra was different, like feeling pain through centuries echo. "Yes. He died, exactly as I'd seen, poisoned by wine meant for his son. Someone at court wanted to change the air." Cassandra opened her eyes, and in them burned ancient fury. "They came for me that very night, accused me of murder, said my prophecy was a spell, that I'd caused his death with my words. They said I was a demon in human form. They burned you." "Not immediately." Cassandra's smile was bitter as poison. "First he came. There were no magical schools then, or if there were, they were secret. He called himself Slytherin. Salazar Slytherin. He said he'd heard of me, of my gift. He said he could save me. Sybill held her breath. One of the founders. This was more than history. This was legend becoming flesh. He brought mirrors, said he could transfer my essence into them, whilst my body was in danger. Then, when things calmed, he could return me. I believed him. What other choice did I have? The mob was already screaming beneath the windows. They demanded my blood. She touched the obsidian frame, her fingers tracing ancient runes. The ritual was painful. It tore my soul to pieces, stretched it between mirrors. I felt my body being left behind, empty. The last thing I remember, smoke. Fire. My scream, but not from my lips. From the lips of what remained. He didn't bring you back. Sybill felt tears on her cheeks. He couldn't. Or wouldn't. I'll never know. He gathered the mirrors and brought them here, to this castle that was just being built. He said here I would be safe, that he was working on a way to return me. But years passed. Decades. Centuries. He never came back. Her voice broke, and I remained here, seeing the world through cracks, hearing echoes of life but never living, watching students grow and leave, teachers age and die. Always alone. Always between worlds. Sybill wept openly now. She knew this pain, not to this extent, never to this extent, but knew what it meant to be imprisoned by one's own gift, to see the future, and have no power to change it. I'm so sorry, she whispered. Don't be. Cassandra straightened her shoulders, and in her bearing appeared ancient dignity. I don't call you out of pity. I call out of necessity. I've seen something terrible, and you're the only one who can stop it. She extended her hand, and the room's light changed. Moonbeams trembled, thickened, and suddenly Sybill was not in the room but in a vision. Hogwarts, dungeons, deeper than any known corridors. Stone walls covered in runes, pulsing with dim red light. At the center, a seal, composed of layers of magic, so ancient it was nearly dissolving into air. And beyond the seal, something. Not a creature, not a living thing, but not dead either. A residue of magic, dark and hungry, accumulated over centuries. It was waiting. It sensed the seal weakening. And soon it would break free. The vision shattered, and Sybill gasped on the floor, her breathing heavy. What was that? She rasped. A forgotten threat. Cassandra gazed at her with sad determination. Slytherin, and the other founders, created this seal when they built the castle. Beneath them was older magic, dark magic, a remnant from times when this land belonged to other powers. They couldn't destroy it, so they sealed it. But seals aren't eternal. And this one is weakening. Why didn't you tell someone earlier? In all these years? I tried. Cassandra's voice rose for the first time, echoing with pain. But who sees a ghost in a mirror? Who listens to a dead seer? For centuries I screamed, but no one heard. Students sometimes noticed me, but they fled, frightened. Teachers saw strangeness and sealed the room again. Only those with the gift, like mine, can truly hear, and there have been few of those. And now? Why is the seal weakening now? Because the Dark Wizard used this land 2 years ago. Voldemort. Cassandra spoke the name without fear. His presence, his magic, awakened old things. He didn't know about the seal, but his power destabilized it. And now, even though he's fallen, the echo remains. The seal is cracking. Sybill rose to her feet, her legs trembling. I must tell Dumbledore. He needs to know. No! Cassandra extended both hands towards the mirror's surface, her face contorting in despair. If you tell him, he'll send someone to investigate. He'll try to strengthen the seal. But he doesn't know how. The founders, magic is forgotten. If someone interferes incorrectly, the seal will break completely, and then everyone will die. Then what should I do? Cassandra was silent, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet, but resolute. Wait. Listen. I'll show you what needs to be done when the time comes. But you must trust me. As no one trusted me. Sybill gazed at her, at this woman imprisoned 5 centuries, for a gift no one wished to hear. She saw in her eyes the same thing she saw in her own every morning. fear that her visions would do more harm than good. But she also saw something else. Hope. "All right," Sybill said, and the word hung in the air between them like an oath. "I trust you." Cassandra's smile was sad but genuine. "Thank you," she whispered. Finally someone hears." Next morning, Sybill taught a lesson for 6th years, trying to focus on tea leaves and symbols at the cup's bottoms. But her thoughts constantly returned to the dungeons, to the vision of that dark magic waiting beneath their feet. Ivy Tremble emerged from the hospital wing that morning. Madame Pomfrey allowed her to return to classes, though the girl still looked paler and quieter than usual. During lunch, Sybill noticed Ivy sitting apart from other Hufflepuff students, staring into emptiness, her fork suspended over her plate. And after lunch, as Sybill returned to her tower, she heard it, a whisper, not a voice, but the sensation of sound, resonating at the edge of hearing. Words she couldn't decipher, but which felt old, so old. She stopped mid-corridor, listening. The whisper didn't cease, a low, constant murmur that seemed to come from below, from the castle's depths. "Professor Trelawney." Sybill jumped. Ivy Tremble stood behind her, her large, dark eyes wide. "Miss Tremble." Sybill pressed a hand to her chest. "You startled me." "Sorry." The girl hesitated. Do you hear it too?" The whisper. Sybill froze. So not only her. "What do you hear, Ivy?" "Voices. They started after the tower." Ivy wrapped herself in her scarf, though the corridor was warm. "At first I thought it was ghosts, or that I was going mad. But now I feel something beneath us. Something that breathes. You know what I mean?" Sybill knew. God, how she knew. "You're not going mad," she said quietly. "But Ivy, you must be careful. Don't go anywhere alone. Don't listen too closely. Sometimes old things want to be heard. And that's not always good." Ivy nodded slowly, but her eyes remained troubled. "Professor, when I was in that room, with the mirrors, I saw a woman. She seemed so lonely, so sad. She was trying to tell me something, but I got frightened and ran. I often think about it. Maybe if I'd stayed, listened." "You did the right thing," Sybill gripped the girl's shoulders. "You protected yourself, that's most important." But even as she said it, she felt the lie in the words. Because the truth was that sometimes protecting yourself meant leaving someone else in danger. And Cassandra had needed help for 500 years. In the library, hidden behind tall shelves in a forgotten corner, Theodore Ashmore and Celine Morrow bent over an open tome. The book was so old its pages nearly crumbled at touch, and the ink had faded to barely visible grey lines. "Here," Theodore jabbed his finger at a page. "Ritual of Binding, the most ancient method of containing dark magic, used by Hogwarts founders to seal threats beneath the earth. Celine, this is it." Celine Morrow was Theodore's opposite in every way. Where he was sharp and energetic, she was soft and thoughtful. Her light hair always fell across her face, hiding grey eyes that saw more than she spoke. She was a Ravenclaw like him, but her approach to knowledge was different. Not conquest, but understanding. "Theo," she said quietly, "this could be dangerous. If the founders created this seal, there was a reason. Perhaps we shouldn't." "Shouldn't what?" "Seek knowledge." Theodore stood, his eyes blazing. "Celine, this woman in the mirror isn't just a ghost, she's trying to tell us something. I feel it. If we can understand what she wants, if we can find what she's guarding." "You don't even know what she's guarding." Celine carefully touched his hand. "Theo, after what happened to Ivy, maybe we should leave this to the professors. Professors have forbidden the tower. They've closed it, as though the problem will vanish if they simply don't look at it." Theodore laughed, but there was no mirth in it. "It's always like this. Adults fear what they don't understand, so they simply hide from it. But we're not children. We can figure this out ourselves. Behind the shelf beside them, Edmund Stornace cleared his throat. Or we could all become dead fools together, he said, emerging from behind a stack of natural history books. Which is also an option, but, not my favorite. Eddie, Theodore sighed. If you've just come to criticize. I came because you weren't at dinner, and I knew you were gnawing at some mad theory again. Edmund settled into a chair beside them. Look, Theo, I understand. You want to solve the puzzle, that's what Ravenclaws do. But sometimes puzzles are dangerous, not because they're difficult, but because they're not meant to be solved. You sound like my father, Theodore muttered. Your father's a wise man, mine too, and both would tell us, don't go poking into old ruins without a plan. Edmund leaned forward. Look, if you really want to do this, fine, but then we do it properly. We learn everything we can, we take precautions, and for Merlin's sake, we don't go there alone at night. Theodore gazed at him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. All right, you're right, we should be smart about this. Thank you. Edmund leaned back, relieved. So we'll go there this evening, all three of us. Theodore's smile was almost devilish. Wait, what? I just said. You said not alone. We won't be alone. There are three of us. And we'll be prepared. Theodore closed the book. Celine, you bring your detection charms. Eddie, you bring that practical sense and maybe something made of solid stone if we need to break something. I'll bring the notes, we'll just look. Quickly. Won't disturb anyone. Celine looked unhappy, but nodded. Edmund groaned. I'm already regretting this, he muttered. You always regret. It's your nature. Theodore clapped him on the back. But then you go anyway. Because you're a good friend. Or an idiot. Sometimes hard to tell. At midnight, the three students crept up the spiral staircase. Celine lit her wand, its light trembling on stone walls. Edmund walked behind, his hand firmly gripping his own wand, ready for anything. Theodore felt his heart pounding in his ears. This was right. He knew it. If they could just see what the woman was warning about, they could help. They could make a difference. The door to the mirror room still bore traces of Dumbledore's protective charms, but they'd been placed hastily, for restraint rather than real security. Theodore needed only a few minutes to find a weak spot, and unravel the magic sufficiently for them to slip inside. The room was exactly as he remembered, mirrors standing guard, reflecting their faces in endless repetitions. But this time, it was different. The air was heavier, saturated with anticipation. Theo, Celine whispered, her hand touching his elbow. Someone's here. Where? Everywhere. I feel a presence. Many presences. In the mirrors. Edmund swore under his breath. This is madness. We're leaving. Now. But Theodore was already moving towards the obsidian mirror, in the far corner. He knew she'd be there. Knew she was waiting. And she was. Lady Cassandra gazed at him from the mirror's depths, her face calm, but her eyes burning with something ancient and powerful. You returned. Her voice echoed in his head. Boy who seeks answers. I want to know. Theodore whispered, pressing against the mirror. What are you trying to say? What are you guarding? Cassandra slowly shook her head. Not what? From what? I'm not a guardian. I'm a warner, one who sees disaster and calls others to flee. Then warn me. Tell me what's coming. Darkness beneath the stone. A curse older than this castle. It awakens. And when it fully wakes, it will devour everything. Suddenly the room's door burst open, and Professor Trelawney entered. Her spectacles reflected wand light, making her eyes enormous spheres of light. What are you doing here? Her voice was sharp, almost furious. I forbade. The headmaster forbade, but then she saw the mirror, saw Cassandra, and fell silent. The three students turned, their faces guilty and frightened. But Theodore didn't step back. Professor, you must hear this. She's trying to warn us about something beneath the castle, something dangerous. Sybill approached slowly, her gaze fixed on the mirror. On Cassandra, who waited in the reflection. You don't understand what you've done, she said quietly, but not to the students, to herself. I was trying. I wanted to protect you. From what? Celine found her voice, so quiet it was barely audible. Professor, what's happening? Sybill stared at Cassandra, and between the two seers, separated by centuries and glass, passed a silent exchange. Question and answer without words. Cassandra nodded. Show them, she said. They're already here. They're already part of this. Hiding the truth now will only delay disaster. Sybill closed her eyes, her hands clenching into fists. When she opened them, in them was a determination the students had never seen in their eccentric divination professor. All right, she said, but you must promise me. What you see, what you hear, you tell no one, not until we understand what to do. Do you promise? The three students exchanged glances, then, one by one, nodded. Sybill approached the mirror and placed both palms on the cold surface. Cassandra mirrored the gesture from the other side. Show them, Sybill whispered. Show them what you showed me. The room's light dimmed. Mirrors began glowing with faint silver radiance, and then the vision seized them all. Dungeons, deep, dark, covered in runes pulsing red light like a dying heart. The seal, layers of magic woven more intricately than any enchantment they'd seen. But cracks everywhere. Like a web across glass. And beyond the seal, hunger. Not physical, something else. A magical void wanting to devour, destroy, turn everything to silence and ash. And a voice, old as the stones beneath them. Soon I shall be free. The vision shattered. All four stood in the room, trembling, their faces white with shock. Edmund was first to recover his breath. Blessed Potters, he whispered. What was that? Truth, Cassandra spoke from the mirror, her voice now echoing for everyone. What I've been trying to say for 5 centuries. What no one wished to hear. Theodore pulled out his notebook, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the quill. You said it's a curse. Created by whom? When? Before the founders, Cassandra spoke slowly, as though trying to recall something from deep past. This land was always special, a place of power. But power can be used differently. Long before Hogwarts there were others here, dark wizards who experimented with magic that shouldn't be touched. They created something, not a creature but an accumulation. A residue of their rituals, their greed. It grew, became stronger. The founders, when they came to build the school, found it. They couldn't destroy it, so they sealed it. But seals aren't eternal. And now it's breaking. Celine stated this as fact. Because of Voldemort. Because of his magic, yes. He used this land 2 years ago. His presence was like a hammer on glass. The seal held, but now it's cracking. And soon, very soon, it will fall completely. When? Theodore was recording every word. Cassandra gazed at something beyond them, her eyes becoming distant. When the moon hides the stars, she spoke and her voice changed, became deeper, echoing with power greater than herself. He who seeks shall find not knowledge but death. Only she who sees through time can seal the door. Only she who has lost everything can save all. Silence fell on the room, heavy and thick. Theodore stared at the words in his notebook, his mind already working on them, trying to decipher. When the moon hides the stars, he murmured. A lunar eclipse? But when? In 3 nights? Sybill spoke quietly but confidently. There will be a partial lunar eclipse, brief, but sufficient. 3 nights, Edmund exhaled. We have 3 nights to work out how to stop a centuries-old curse. Wonderful. Simply wonderful. He who seeks shall find not knowledge but death, Celine repeated, looking at Theodore. Theo, it's not about me, he said too quickly, too sharply. It sounds exactly about you. Edmund crossed his arms. You're the one who seeks. You're the one who can't leave a puzzle unsolved. And she, who sees through time? Theodore pointed at Sybill. That's obviously Professor Trelawney. She's a seer. She can help. Sybill shook her head, her face sad. Or Lady Cassandra. She sees too. Perhaps even better than I. But she's imprisoned, Celine said softly. How can she seal anything if she can't leave the mirror? That was a question to which no one had an answer. Cassandra gazed at them all, her face calm, but in her eyes something smoldered. Whether fear or hope was hard to say. Prophecies are never simple, she said. They show a path but not a map. Answers will come, but only if you're willing to seek them. And risk death if the prophecy's true, Edmund added grimly. All paths have a price, Cassandra replied. The question is whether you're willing to pay it for those you love. For this castle. For everyone who lives here. Theodore straightened, his chin lifting in that stubborn gesture Edmund knew too well. Then we'll work it out. Together. He looked at Sybill. Professor, will you help us? Sybill gazed at him for a long time, then at Cassandra, then back at the students. 3 young faces, full of determination and fear in equal measure. She remembered Thomas, remembered how he'd looked at her before that final mission. Full of certainty he was doing the right thing. He'd died. But he'd also saved a family. Saved a boy who now lived because Thomas made a choice. Sometimes the gift wasn't a curse. Sometimes it was responsibility. And responsibility meant choice, even when the choice was frightening. Yes, she said finally. I'll help, but on my terms. We do this carefully, we do this intelligently, and if at any moment I say we stop, we stop. Understood? The 3 students nodded. Good. Sybill turned to Cassandra. What do we need to know? Where do we begin? Cassandra smiled, the first true smile they'd seen from her. Begin with the library. Search for records about the ritual of binding. The founders left hints if one knows where to look. And she touched the mirror's surface. I'll show you more. When you're ready. When the time comes. We have 3 days, Theodore said, noting the final sentence. That's not much time. No, Cassandra agreed, but sometimes that's all fate gives us. The question is what we do with the time we have. She began to fade, her image dissolving back into the mirror's depths. Go, she said. Search, learn, and I'll wait, as I've always waited, but now, with hope. The mirror darkened, and she vanished, leaving only their own reflections, staring back with troubled faces. 4 stood in the mirror room's silence, amongst mirrors that held secrets of 5 centuries. Beyond the windows fog slowly lifted, revealing first glimpses of dawn. So, Edmund finally spoke, his voice weary. We have to stop a centuries-old curse in 3 days, or we all die. That's the plan. Essentially, yes. Theodore closed his notebook. Marvelous plan. I like it. Especially the bit about dying. Eddie. Celine gently touched his shoulder. We'll manage. How do you know? Because we must. She smiled. Weakly but genuinely. There's no other choice. Sybill gazed at them. These children now bearing a burden that wasn't theirs to carry. But perhaps that's how it always was. Perhaps youth existed precisely to do what adults had lost the courage for. Come, she said. We need to start. And we need to be smart. If Dumbledore finds out too early, he'll try to solve this himself. He'll put himself at risk. And we'll put ourselves at risk instead. Edmund raised an eyebrow. We'll put ourselves at risk alongside him, when the time comes. When we're ready, Sybill pointed at the door. And now, you go to your dormitories. I'll repair the protective charms so Dumbledore doesn't notice they were breached. And tomorrow, after classes, we meet in the library. Quietly. Carefully. When the students left, Sybill remained alone in the mirror room. She approached the obsidian mirror and touched its surface. Cassandra, she whispered, if you hear me, tell me I'm doing the right thing. Tell me I'm not leading them to death. Silence. Then, barely perceptible, in the mirror's depths appeared a shadow. And a voice, quiet as the whisper of ages. You're doing what must be done. That's the only right thing any of us can do. The rest is in fate's hands. Sybill nodded, though tears ran down her cheeks. She knew this truth too well, knew how little control they actually had, even when seeing the future. But perhaps that was the point. not seeing the future, but choosing to face it, even when frightened. Even when the price might be too high. She left the room, closing the door behind her, and slowly descended to her dawn, to her next day of pretense and hiding. But now, something had changed. Now she wasn't hiding from the gift, she was preparing to use it again. And prayed to all powers she believed and didn't believe in that this time it wouldn't cost the lives of those she was trying to protect. Sybill stood before the headmaster's office door, her hand hovering over the gargoyle that served as a knocker. She hadn't slept all night, mulling over what exactly she would say. How much truth could she reveal without putting the students at risk? How much could she hide without endangering everyone else? In the end, she knocked. "Enter." Dumbledore's voice came through the wood, warm and inviting. As though he'd been expecting her. He probably had been. Sybill climbed the spiral staircase and entered the office, which always smelt of lemon drops and old parchment. Dumbledore sat behind his desk, Fawkes drowsing on his perch, and portraits of former headmasters watching with varying degrees of interest. "Sybill," Dumbledore gestured for her to sit. "I rather suspected you'd come. Sherbet lemon? No thank you." She perched on the chair's edge, her hands tightly clasped on her knees. "I have something to tell you. About the North Tower. About Lady Cassandra." Dumbledore didn't look surprised. He never looked surprised. "You've spoken with her," he said simply. "Yes, she showed me something. A vision. Beneath the castle there's something dark. A curse, she says. A residue of magic older than Hogwarts. The founders sealed it, but the seal is weakening." Dumbledore slowly leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled before his lips. "That is a serious claim," he said quietly, "and yet not unexpected. I've always sensed there were layers beneath this castle, stories buried deeper than we know." "Albus," Sybill leaned forward, "she says the seal will fall soon. During the lunar eclipse, in 2 days." Now he looked concerned. His brows drew together and he rose, approaching the window. 2 days, he repeated. "That's very little time to prepare for something of such magnitude. Are you certain the vision was true?" "As certain as I can be about anything." She chose her words carefully. "Cassandra isn't lying. She spent 5 centuries trying to warn someone. I believe her." Dumbledore turned to her, his blue eyes studying her face with that penetration that always made her feel as though he saw every hidden truth. "Sybill," he said gently, "your gift, it isn't a curse. I know you think it is. Know what happened with Mr. Harrington weighs on your soul, but the gift is responsibility, not guilt. You see what others cannot, and that's why you have the power to change fates." Tears filled her eyes, and she turned away. "I don't want this responsibility. I never wanted it, I know. But it's yours, whether you want it or not." He approached and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Tell me what else you're not saying. Who else knows about this?" She hesitated. This was the moment. She could protect the students, take all responsibility herself, or trust Dumbledore as she'd asked the students to trust her. 3 students, she admitted. Theodore Ashmore, Celine Morrow, Edmund Starnus. They were in the room last night. Cassandra spoke to them. They saw the vision too. "I see." Dumbledore returned to his desk and sat. "And they wish to help, I suspect." "Yes. And you permitted them." "I didn't know how to stop them. And," she took a deep breath, "perhaps part of me believes they're needed. Cassandra's prophecy. It speaks of one who seeks, of one who sees. Perhaps we're all part of this." Dumbledore was silent for a long moment, considering, then nodded. "Very well, we work with what we have, but with conditions. I want to know everything you learn, and if at any point the situation becomes too dangerous, I intervene. The students are under my protection, Sybill. I won't allow them to come to harm." "Neither will I," she said quietly. "Then we understand each other." He stood. "And now, I think, we need to learn more about this. What did you call it?" "Curse." Cassandra called it a residue. Dark magic accumulated over centuries. "Then we need an expert." Dumbledore approached the fireplace and tossed a handful of powder into the flames. "Phileas, could you step into my office for a moment? Within moments, Professor Flitwick's head appeared in green flames, his high voice cheerful. "Headmaster, of course, I'll be right there." The flames died, and less than a minute later, the small charms professor entered the office, his eyes twinkling with curiosity. "What can I do for you, Albus?" He noticed Sybill and bowed. "Professor Trelawney, good morning." "Phileas," Dumbledore spoke seriously, "we need your expertise. We're searching for information about the Founders, protective magic, specifically about seals that might have been laid beneath the castle." Flitwick's eyebrows rose high. "Beneath the castle? How intriguing. Most intriguing." He hopped onto a chair, his feet barely touching the floor. "There are, of course, legends. Rumors that the Founders encountered complications during construction. But concrete records are exceedingly rare. What do you know?" Flitwick pondered, his small fingers tapping his chin. "There was one mention in Ravenclaw's personal papers. She wrote about a Shadowgate, a seal created jointly by all 4 Founders to contain something she described as a hunger without form. She didn't elaborate, but hinted it was something very old, something that existed on this land before them." "Where is this seal?" Sybill asked. "If the records are to be believed, deep beneath the dungeons, in the very heart of the castle's foundations." Flitwick leaned forward. "But Headmaster, why do you ask? Is there reason to believe the seal is threatened?" Dumbledore and Sybill exchanged glances. Then Dumbledore briefly explained the situation. Cassandra's visions, the weakening seal, the lunar eclipse. When he finished, Flitwick looked serious, which was rare for the usually jovial man. "If this is true," he said quietly, "then we have very little time. I'll begin research immediately. Perhaps there's something in the library that could help. Old grimoires, the Founders, journals." "Thank you, Phileas." Dumbledore nodded. "Keep me informed of anything you find." Flitwick hurried away, and Sybill and Dumbledore were left alone. "What now?" she asked. "Now we wait, research, and prepare for the worst." He looked at her. "And you, Sybill, keep the students close. Watch them. And if you see another vision, any vision, you come to me immediately." "Agreed, agreed." But even as she left the office, she knew there were things she couldn't tell him. Visions too personal, too frightening. The vision of Theodore's death she'd seen last night still burned in her mind. The Hogwarts library after hours was a realm of silence and dust. Sybill met the students in the furthest corner, between shelves of books on ancient magic and forgotten rituals. Theodore had already erected a perimeter of books, creating a small fortress of knowledge. Celine was researching a thick tome, her light hair falling across the pages. Edmund leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling with the look of someone seriously reconsidering his life choices. Ivy Tremble sat a bit apart, her fingers nervously picking at the edge of her robe. After the incident in the mirror room, she'd become quieter, more withdrawn. But when Theodore asked her to join the research, she'd agreed, perhaps because she wanted to understand what had happened to her, or because she couldn't ignore the whispers she now heard constantly. "Professor," Theodore stood when he saw Sybill. "We've found something." He unfolded a large book, so old the leather binding was cracking. "This is Rowena Ravenclaw's journal. Well, a copy, of course, the original's at the Ministry. But there's a section about the castle's construction. She writes about an anomaly beneath the bedrock, something they found when digging the foundations." Sybill leaned in, reading the ancient text. "We found it on the 9th day of excavation. A chamber, older than any human construction carved from the living rock. Within it, a darkness that moved without form, that hungered without mouth. Salazar wished to study it. Godric wished to destroy it. Helga urged caution. I saw its nature through my arts. It was not alive, yet not dead. A remnant of magic practiced long before our time, twisted and corrupted by centuries of neglect and misuse. We could not destroy it. It had become part of the land itself, so we sealed it. 4 magics, woven together, stronger than any one of us alone. But I fear seals do not last forever." "Seals do not last forever," Celine whispered. She knew. Even then she knew. "Look here." Theodore turned several pages. She describes the sealing ritual. It requires 4 wizards, each representing one element: will, wisdom, loyalty, ambition. Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, Slytherin. And to restore it? Sybill asked. She doesn't write about that. Theodore frowned. Perhaps she didn't think it would be necessary. Or she didn't know how. Celine finished quietly. Edmund finally spoke, his voice grim. So we have a seal we can't restore, holding something we can't kill. And we have roughly a day and a half to work this out. Anyone else feeling slightly lost? We're not lost, Theodore insisted. We're simply seeking the right path. Path to what? Death? Edmund sat straight. Theo, you heard the prophecy. He who seeks shall find not knowledge but death. That's about you. You're the one who can't stop seeking. Prophecies aren't always literal, Theodore dismissed, but something in his voice was less certain. And sometimes they're exactly that, Sybill said quietly, and everyone turned to her. She didn't want to speak, wanted to protect them from the knowledge, but if she said nothing, they'd walk blindly into darkness. I saw something, last night, a vision. What did you see? Celine's voice was barely audible. Sybill closed her eyes, trying to find words. Darkness. Runes glowing red. And Theodore, she opened her eyes, looking straight at the youth. You were standing before something enormous, something dark reaching towards you. I didn't see the end. But I felt death, very close. Silence fell on their corner of the library. Theodore stared at her, his face pale but resolute. Then I won't go there, he said finally. What? Edmund looked shocked. If I'm the one who'll die, then I won't go. You'll all go. Find the seal. Work out how to strengthen it. I'll stay here, safe. Theodore spoke this evenly, but his hands trembled. Problem solved. Theo. Celine touched his hand. You can't just... I can, and I will. He closed the book sharply. I'm not a fool. If visions say I'll die, I'm not offering myself up. But Sybill saw the truth in his eyes. He was lying. Not to them, to himself. Theodore Ashmore couldn't stay behind when there was a puzzle to solve. It would be against his nature, and that's what made the prophecy so frightening. That evening, Sybill returned to the mirror room. Cassandra waited, her face appearing immediately when Sybill entered. You must show me, Sybill spoke without greeting. The path to Shadowgate, where it is, how to reach it. Cassandra tilted her head. Are you certain? If I show you, they'll go. And someone might not return. They'll go anyway. At least this way they'll go prepared. Cassandra was silent for a moment, then nodded. Very well, look. She extended both hands towards the mirror's surface, and it blazed. Images flooded Sybill's mind. Not visions of the future, but a map of the past. Memories woven into the castle's very stone. Dungeons. Deeper than the potion classrooms, beyond old chambers no one used anymore. A hidden door behind a blind statue. Stairs leading down, down into darkness. A corridor covered in runes, pulsing with dim red light. And finally, a chamber. Circular, with the seal at its center. 4 symbols, one from each founder, intertwined in an intricate pattern. And beneath the seal, movement. Darkness that breathed. The vision released her, and Sybill staggered. Cassandra watched her with concern. You see now, she said quietly. The path is open, but Sybill, when you go there, be ready. The seal will break soon. And when it breaks, the darkness will surge forth. It will seek power, living magic. It will try to devour someone. How can we stop it? By sacrifice. Cassandra spoke the word as though it were a stone in her mouth. Someone must give part of their magic, their life, to strengthen the seal. It's the only way. Who? She who sees through time. Cassandra gazed at her penetratingly. A seer. One whose magic already exists between worlds. Understanding struck Sybill like a physical blow. You, she whispered. Or me. Yes, Cassandra smiled sadly. We both stand on the edge. Between life and death, between past and future. Our magic can seal what others cannot touch. But if I give part of my magic, part of my life, you'll survive. But you'll change. Your gift will become weaker, perhaps vanish entirely. Cassandra touched the mirror's surface. That's the price, freedom from the gift you've always feared. But also loss of part of who you are. Sybill stood silently, pondering. Her gift, the thing she hated, feared, tried to drown in Sherian theatricality. The possibility of losing it should be relief, but somehow it wasn't. I'll think about it, she said finally. Don't think too long, Cassandra warned. Time is running out, and darkness doesn't wait. The next day passed in nervous tension. Students taught their lessons more carefully, as though trying to create an appearance of normality. Flitwick reported to Dumbledore that he'd found more mentions of Shadowgate, but nothing about how to restore the seal. McGonagall accidentally overheard a conversation between Theodore and Celine in the corridor, and came to Dumbledore with demands to stop, quote, whatever madness the students are planning. Dumbledore calmed her, explaining the situation. Minerva was outraged that students were involved, but eventually agreed to let them continue, on condition of constant supervision. If one hair falls from their heads, Albus, she warned, I shall personally transform you into a clock and place you in the corridor as a warning to others. Dumbledore smiled. I take your concern to heart, Minerva, and promise I'll do everything possible to protect them. But even he knew some things were beyond his control. At midnight 5 gathered at the dungeon's entrance, Sybill, Theodore, Celine, Edmund and Ivy. Dumbledore and McGonagall waited at a distance, ready to intervene if needed. Are you certain of this? Sybill asked one last time, looking at each young face. No, Edmund answered honestly, but we're doing it anyway. Because we must, Celine added. Theodore said nothing, but his jaw was set with determination. Ivy trembled, but when Sybill touched her shoulder, the girl straightened. I hear the whispers louder and louder, she said quietly. It's calling. Perhaps I can... I don't know, understand it. Help. Sybill nodded, then led them down. The path was as Cassandra had shown. A hidden door, narrow stairs, a corridor with runes. With each step, the air grew heavier, colder. The whispers Ivy heard now reached them all, a low, constant murmur resonating in bones. Here, Sybill stopped before large doors covered in symbols of the 4 houses. Beyond these doors, Shadowgate. Theodore approached the doors, his hand reaching towards Gryffindor's lion symbol. No spell needed, he murmured. Just touch from those belonging to each house. He touched the lion. Celine touched Ravenclaw's eagle. Edmund, Hufflepuff's badger. There was no one from Slytherin, but Sybill, after a moment's hesitation, touched the serpent symbol. The doors slowly opened. The chamber inside was circular, roughly 30 feet in diameter. At the center, the seal. It glowed with dim light, but even from a distance they could see cracks, hundreds of small lines spreading like a web across the surface. And beneath the seal, movement. Darkness flowing like liquid, pulsing like a heart. Bloody hell, Edmund whispered. Theodore stepped into the chamber, mesmerized. He approached the seal, his eyes scanning the runes. This is incredible, he whispered. The complexity of the magic, the way they wove 4 different systems together. Theo, step away from it, Sybill commanded, but he wasn't listening. He crouched by the seal, his fingers tracing one of the runes. If I can understand the structure, perhaps I can... Theodore Ashmore, step back now. Sybill's voice was sharp, filled with true authority. But it was too late. His finger touched a crack in the seal, and something answered. The seal flashed red light and sound, like breaking glass, but deeper, older, echoed in the chamber. The cracks began widening, slowly at first, then faster, spreading like a web shattering under weight. The red light grew brighter, pulsing in rhythm with something breathing beneath them. The darkness beneath the seal sensed the weakening, and began seeping through the cracks. At first just thin threads, blacker than night, flowing from the fissures, but then they thickened, grew stronger. They moved with their own will, scouts for a hungry army. No! Sybill lunged forward, her wand raised. Protego Maxima! A silver shield blazed between them and the darkness, but the tendrils simply flowed through it as though it were paper. Protective magic didn't work. This wasn't something that could be blocked. The darkness reached for the nearest living magic. towards Ivy. The girl stood closest to the seal, her face frozen in horror. She saw the tendrils reaching for her but couldn't move, paralyzed by primal fear. "Ivy, why? Run!" Celine screamed, but it was too late. The darkness coiled around Ivy's ankle, cold and heavy as iron shackles. The girl screamed, a heart-rending sound, and fell to her knees. Her wand rolled across the stone floor, its light flickering and dying. The darkness began pulling her towards the seal, towards the widening crack. "Ivy!" Edmund rushed to her, his strong hands gripping her wrists. "Hold on, I won't let go." He pulled with all his strength, his face reddening from exertion, but the darkness was stronger. It dragged them both towards the seal, slowly, inexorably. "Relatio!" Celine threw a spell at the tendrils, but they simply absorbed the magic, growing thicker. "Defindo! Confringo!" None of the spells worked. The darkness simply devoured their magic, and grew from it. Theodore finally moved, breaking from his paralysis. He ran to Edmund, grabbed Ivy's other shoulder. "Together!" he shouted. "Pull!" They pulled together, their feet sliding on stone, but the darkness wouldn't release. More tendrils emerged from the cracks, coiling around Ivy's legs, her waist, reaching for her hands. "It's taking me," Ivy whispered, her voice strangely calm, as though she'd already surrendered. "I feel it wants to take my magic, drink me dry." "No." Sybill threw herself forward, her wand glowing. Lumos Maxima. Light blazed from the wand, brighter than the sun, striking the tendrils. They shuddered, retreated for a moment, but then flowed forward again, hungrier than before. The seal cracked louder, a large piece broke away, and through the opening darkness poured, no longer thin threads but a flood, like black water from a burst dam. The chamber filled with cold, not ordinary cold but something deeper, the cold of emptiness, of absence, of oblivion. "We have to leave, now." Edmund shouted, but his hands were slipping. Ivy was being pulled harder. Sybill felt panic rising in her chest. They were losing. Spells didn't work. The darkness was too strong, too hungry. She saw Ivy being dragged towards the seal, saw terror in the girl's eyes, heard her sobs. And behind it all, in the depths of her mind, she heard a voice. "Sacrifice. Only sacrifice can stop this." "Cassandra." Sybill spun sharply. In the seal's dim red light, on its mirror-like surface, appeared a reflection. But not theirs, Cassandra's. Lady Cassandra Windermere gazed at her through centuries, her face serious and sad. "I told you, Sybill, the seal needs magic, living magic. Part of someone must become part of the seal to strengthen it." "How?" Sybill shouted through the darkness's roar. "Tell me how." "A ritual. An old ritual, older than the Founders. Someone must give part of their being, magic, life, soul, bind themselves to the seal forever. Who? Who must do this?" Cassandra gazed at her, and in her eyes was understanding needing no words. She who sees through time, a seer, one whose magic already exists between worlds. You, Sybill, or me. Sybill felt the world still. Ivy still screamed. Edmund and Theodore still pulled, their hands bleeding from strain. Celine threw spell after spell in desperate attempt to save her friend. The darkness kept rising, flowing from the seal, filling the chamber, but Sybill saw only Cassandra. The woman who'd spent 5 centuries imprisoned, who'd given her life already when they burned her. "You've already given everything," Sybill whispered. "Yes. But I'm still not free. I'm bound to mirrors, not to the seal. If one of the living gives part of their life, their magic, I can cross over, become part of the seal forever. My magic, accumulated over 5 centuries, will strengthen it. But for this I need a bridge. Someone must guide me." "Me." Sybill said it simply, without drama. "I'll do it. You'll lose part of yourself, perhaps your entire gift, perhaps more. I know. You might die. I know." Cassandra smiled, sadly but with warmth Sybill had never seen in her before. "Then we do this together." 2 seers, across centuries, one final vision. Suddenly the chamber's doors burst open with a crash, and Dumbledore entered, McGonagall behind him. The headmaster assessed the situation in a moment. The crumbling seal, the flowing darkness, Ivy screaming, students desperately fighting. Sybill, no! He understood immediately, seeing her face, the way she gazed at the seal. You cannot. I must. She turned to him, and in her eyes was calm resolution. Albus, you know I must. It's the only way. There are other paths. Give me time to find. There is no time. She pointed at Ivy, now half inside the seal's crack, her body disappearing into darkness. She'll die in minutes. They all will. Dumbledore stared at her, and on his face played inner struggle. Then, very slowly, he nodded. What do you need? Simply, don't interfere, and care for them after, please. She looked at the students. Edmund, Theodore, Celine, Ivy. They're not to blame. This was my responsibility. McGonagall stepped forward, her voice trembling. Professor Trelawney. Care for them, Minerva. Sybill smiled weakly. They're good children, even Theodore, though he's far too curious for his own good. Then she turned to the seal, to Cassandra waiting in the mirror reflection. I'm ready, Sybill said. Show me what to do. Cassandra extended both hands towards the seal's surface. Sybill took a step forward, approaching the darkness flowing around her, towards the seal glowing red. She raised her wand, and something in the air changed. The darkness sensed her intentions. Sensed new magic, fresh, living, ready for devouring. It released Ivy and lunged at Sybill. The divination professor saw the darkness rushing towards her, a flood of hunger, emptiness, eternal cold. She saw her past, Thomas, his smile, his last kiss before that mission. She saw her present, these students, this castle, this woman from the mirror, who'd waited 5 centuries for release. And she stepped forward, towards the darkness, her wand raised high. Animam mem offero, her voice echoed in the chamber, ancient and powerful, pro omnibus, pro vita, pro luce. Light blazed from her, not only from the wand but from her heart, her soul, from the very essence of who Sybill Trelawney was. And the darkness swallowed her. The last thing she heard before the world dissolved into pain and cold was Cassandra's voice, soft and grateful. Thank you. Finally I can rest. And then, only darkness. Cold. Not the ordinary cold of a winter morning or a frosty night. This was the cold of absence, a place where warmth had never existed and never could. Sybill floated in it, not falling, not flying, simply was. The darkness around her wasn't black. It was a color that didn't exist in the ordinary world, a shade that made her eyes ache. She tried to scream, but there was no sound. Tried to move, but her body wouldn't obey. Did she even have a body? She couldn't tell. Sensations dissolved, mixed, became something else. Where am I? The answer came not in words, but as knowledge that simply appeared in her consciousness. Between worlds, between life and death, between past and future. The place where mirrors lived. The place where time didn't exist because it was everywhere at once. And then she saw light. Not bright, not harsh. Soft silver, spilling through darkness like dawn through fog. It approached, formed, became something more than just glow. Became a woman. Lady Cassandra Windermere stood before her, not as a reflection in a mirror, not as a ghostly image, but real. Her burgundy velvet dress now glowed with that same silver radiance, her dark hair floating around her as though she stood underwater. Her face was calm, but in her eyes burned something ancient and inexorable. Sybill. Cassandra's voice didn't echo but simply was, filling the space. You came. Finally, you're here. Sybill tried to speak, and this time words appeared, though her lips didn't move. Where are we? In the in-between. Where I've lived 5 centuries. Cassandra extended her hand, and Sybill felt warmth. the first sensation of warmth since the darkness swallowed her. But we cannot stay here long. The darkness is distracted by me now, trying to understand what I'm doing. We have minutes, perhaps less. What must we do? Cassandra didn't answer in words. Instead, she turned, and the space around them changed. The darkness receded, revealing a path. It wasn't a corridor, not a track, simply a direction, a lighter line in the darkness, leading somewhere beyond. Come, Cassandra said. I'll show you what must happen, but you must look quickly. You must understand. She took Sybill's hand. The touch was real, warm, alive, and led her forward. Outside, in the chamber with the seal, chaos escalated. Darkness flowed from the cracks, thick streams coiling around stone columns, creeping up walls, reaching for the students retreating towards the doors. She's gone. Celine screamed, her voice trembling with panic. Professor Trelawney, the darkness took her. We have to do something, now. Edmund held Ivy, who still trembled after her own captivity. Theodore stood by the seal, his face wet with sweat and tears. He stared at the runes glowing red, at the cracks spreading ever wider. This was his fault. He'd touched the seal, he'd broken it. He'd given Professor Trelawney to the darkness. Theodore! Dumbledore's voice was sharp, commanding. Focus. Can you read the runes? Theodore blinked, forced himself to look at the headmaster. Yes. They're about binding. 4 magics woven together. But one of the lines is broken. Here. He pointed to where his finger had touched the crack. I disrupted the balance. Then we restore it. Dumbledore approached the seal, his wand glowing blue. Minerva, hold the barrier. Don't let the darkness beyond this chamber. McGonagall nodded, her face stern and focused. She stood by the doors, her wand drawing an intricate pattern in the air. A silver wall blazed, separating the chamber from the rest of the dungeons. Students, behind me, now, she called. But Celine didn't move. She stared at the seal, her light hair falling across her face, hiding her expression. Something in her had changed, the way she stood, how she held her wand. Her breathing slowed, became deeper. Celine, come on! Edmund tugged her sleeve, but she stood immovable as roots. Wait, she whispered. I see something. What do you see? Theodore turned to her, and his eyes widened. Celine? The girl's eyes glowed, not metaphorically, but literally. A faint, silver radiance, the same as Professor Trelawney's during True Visions. Celine looked at the seal, and her voice changed, became distant, as though speaking from another place. The runes, they're not in the right order. Someone changed them, long ago, very long ago. Her hand rose, fingers pointing at symbols on the seal. Here, and here, and here. 3 runes transposed. That's why the seal is weak. That's why it's breaking. Dumbledore spun sharply to her, his blue eyes narrowing. Miss Morrow, you see this? Yes, Celine blinked, and the glow faded. She swayed, and Edmund caught her. I've always seen, a little. Never told anyone. Was afraid they'd call me mad. You're not mad, Theodore spoke quickly, his mind already working. You're a seer. Weak perhaps, but genuine. And you see which runes are wrong. Yes. Then tell me, quickly. I'll correct them. Celine approached the seal, her fingers tracing symbols, not touching but sensing their magic. This rune, she pointed at a symbol resembling a twisted serpent, should be here. And this one, a symbol like an eye, should be there. And this one, the third symbol, an abstract spiral, should be in the center, not at the side. Theodore watched, his mind processing information, then nodded. I understand. But to change the runes, I need to touch the seal. And if I touch it again, then we touch together. Edmund approached him, placed a hand on his shoulder. I'm with you. And Ivy, still pale but resolute, stood on the other side. Celine looked at them all, and a faint smile appeared on her face. Together, she said. like the founders. 4 houses, 4 magics. You're not from different houses? Dumbledore observed, but in his voice was approval. No, Theodore agreed, but we represent them. Celine, Ravenclaw, wisdom. I'm Ravenclaw too, but now I represent Slytherin, ambition to correct my mistake. Edmund, Hufflepuff, loyalty. Ivy, also Hufflepuff, but she survived the darkness. She represents Gryffindor, courage. That's not how magic works, Dumbledore began. Perhaps that's exactly how it works, Theodore smiled. For the first time in hours, magic is intent, and our intent is clear. Dumbledore looked at them, at 4 students standing around the seal, ready to risk, then nodded. Then do it, but carefully, and if anything goes wrong, I intervene. The 4 students exchanged glances, then, together, extended their hands and touched the seal. In the space between worlds, Sybill and Cassandra walked the path of light through endless darkness. Didn't walk, really. Moved, floated, teleported. Time here had no meaning. Look, Cassandra said, and the space around them tore. Images poured in a stream. Not memories, but something more real. Sensations, emotions, moments frozen in time. A royal court. A great hall with tapestries and candles. Cassandra, younger, with a face that didn't yet know pain. She stands before a king, her voice trembling. Your Majesty, I saw, at the winter solstice, poison in the cup. You must cancel the feast. But the king laughs. His advisors whisper, "Witch, she wants power, she's trying to frighten us." The image shifted, time accelerated. The feast. The king raises his cup, drinks. His face turns blue. He falls. Chaos, screams. Cassandra fleeing through corridors, guards pursuing her. "Witch, you killed the king, your curse." A chamber. Dark, cold. She awaits trial that won't come. Sybill felt tears on her cheeks, though she didn't know if she could cry here. They didn't believe you. They never believe. Cassandra spoke simply, without bitterness. That's the price of foresight. We see truth, but truth is frightening. And people fear more than lies. The images continued flowing. A square, a stake, wood piled high, a crowd screaming, "Burn the witch, burn the cursed one." Cassandra stands at the stake, her hands bound. She doesn't cry. She looks at the sky. And then he comes. Salazar Slytherin. Tall, dark, with eyes cold as ice. He speaks to her quietly, so no one hears. "I can save you. But the price is high." "Any price is better than death," she answers. "Even life without life," she hesitates, then nods. The image grew darker, more painful. A ritual. Mirrors arranged around her. Slytherin reading spells in a language older than Latin. Cassandra screams as her soul tears, stretches between reflections. And then, fire. They burn her body, but her soul is no longer there. It's in the mirrors. Trapped. Imprisoned. 5 centuries. Alone. Always seeing. Never being seen. Screaming soundlessly. Waiting. Until Sybill came. The images stopped. Sybill and Cassandra stood in silence between worlds. "Now you understand," Cassandra said, "why I cannot stay here, why I must move on." "To the seal," Sybill whispered. "Yes, I'll become part of it. A living rune. The 5th magic that will strengthen what the founders created. But I cannot reach there alone. I need a bridge, living magic to bind me to the seal. My magic. Your gift. Part of it." Cassandra looked at her, and in her eyes was sad tenderness. "You'll lose your connection with me forever, Sybill. When I become part of the seal, I won't be able to speak with you. You won't see me in mirrors. This is a final farewell." Sybill gazed at this woman, at the seer who'd suffered for her gift, as she herself had, who'd spent 5 centuries in loneliness, waiting for someone to hear. "Then farewell," she said softly, "and thank you for showing me the gift isn't only a curse." Cassandra smiled. "Come, time is nearly out." She extended her hand, and together they moved forward, through darkness, to where the seal waited. In the chamber, 4 students touched the seal, their magic flowing together, mixing, becoming something new. Theodore felt the runes beneath his fingers, not physically but magically. He could sense their structure, the way they'd been woven, and he saw the mistakes, places where someone, perhaps Slytherin himself, had changed the order, weakened the seal intentionally or accidentally. "Now," he whispered. "Celine, guide me." Celine closed her eyes, her gift unfolding again. She saw the correct pattern, the way the runes should lie. Left, 3 inches, there. Theodore focused, his magic flowing into the seal, carefully, gently. He touched the serpent rune, felt it rise, float beneath his will. "Edmund, Ivy, keep the seal stable," he commanded. "If it starts breaking, stop me." Both nodded, their magic flowing into the seal, creating foundation, base. The first rune shifted, slowly, painfully. But it moved. The seal cracked but didn't break. "Good," Theodore exhaled. "Next, Celine?" "Right. Center. The eye rune." He repeated the process, his forehead beading with sweat. This was like surgery, but magical. One wrong move and everything could fall. The second rune shifted. The darkness in the chamber sensed changes. It shuddered, retreated for a moment, as though concerned. Then, enraged, surged forward with doubled force. "Hold!" Dumbledore shouted, his own magic joining McGonagall's barrier. "Don't let it reach the students!" The silver wall cracked under assault but held. Third rune. Celine barely held consciousness, her gift draining strength. The spiral. To the center. "Quickly, Theo. I can't hold the vision long." Theodore clenched his teeth, focused all his will. The third rune was hardest. It had to go to the seal's very heart, where magic was densest, most dangerous. His fingers burned. His mind screamed for him to let go. But he saw Professor Trelawney's face, how darkness had swallowed her. He'd caused this. He had to fix it. The spiral rune shifted. Crawled towards the center. Almost there. Almost. The seal flashed red light, and Theodore cried out in pain. But he didn't release. "A bit more!" Celine shouted. "You're almost," and suddenly the rune clicked into place. The seal froze. The red light died. The cracks stopped widening. And then, from below, from the seal's very heart, blazed new light. Not red, not silver, golden. Sybill and Cassandra reached the path's end. Before them was nothing, and simultaneously everything. The seal, but not as it was in the real world. Here, in the space between, it was alive, breathing, pulsing. 4 symbols of the Founders glowed on its surface. Lion, eagle, badger, serpent. But between them was space. A 5th place. Empty, waiting. "Here," Cassandra said. "Here I must be." She approached the seal, placed both palms on its surface. The seal responded, light flowing from it, coiling around Cassandra, beginning to pull inward. "Sybill." Cassandra's voice was calm, even as her body began dissolving. "Give me your hand. You must guide me, be the bridge." Sybill stepped forward, extended her hand, touched Cassandra's shoulder, and the world exploded. Magic surged through her, not from her but through her, as though she were simply a channel. Cassandra's gift, accumulated over 5 centuries, flowed into the seal, using Sybill's living magic as a bridge between imprisonment and destination. The pain was absolute. Not physical. Worse, it was the sensation of part of her soul, that part always looking forward, always seeing the future, stretching, thinning, interweaving with foreign magic. She saw everything at once. Cassandra's past, her own past, futures that could be, futures that wouldn't be. Thousands of paths, millions of possibilities, all overlaid on each other, all screaming simultaneously. And then, when pain reached its peak, when Sybill was certain her mind would shatter from overload, calm, silence. Cassandra smiled at her, her face glowing with golden radiance. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not an end. A beginning. You are free." And she dissolved, her form flowing into the seal, becoming part of the stone, part of the runes, part of the very magic holding back darkness. The seal blazed with golden fire. And Sybill felt something push her back, thrust her from the space between worlds, return her to reality. She fell. Not into emptiness, not onto cold stone, into warm arms that caught her. Professor Trelawney. Voices, familiar voices, Celine, Ivy, they held her, their faces close, frightened but alive. Sybill blinked, the chamber's light striking her eyes after the darkness of the space between. She saw Edmund standing nearby, his hand on Theodore's shoulder. Saw Theodore gazing at her with a face full of guilt and relief. Saw Dumbledore and McGonagall approaching, their wands still raised, ready for defense. But there was no more darkness. Sybill slowly rose, leaning on the students. Her legs trembled but held. She looked at the seal and caught her breath. The seal glowed, not with the red light of cracks, but with golden radiance of healed magic. The cracks hadn't vanished, not entirely. They were still visible, but sealed, filled with something new. And on the seal's surface, between the four founders' symbols, appeared a fifth, an eye. Open, seeing, carved in stone, with such detail it seemed alive, and inside the eye, a face, barely visible, delicate, like engraving on an old precious stone. Cassandra's face. She hadn't vanished. She was here, part of the seal, forever vigilant. She did it, Sybill whispered. She became part of the seal. And you, Professor? Celine held her tightly, as though afraid to let go. Are you all right? Sybill looked at her hands. They glowed, barely perceptible, faint golden radiance beneath skin, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. She knew what this meant. Her gift had changed, hadn't vanished. Cassandra hadn't taken it entirely. But it was different now. Quieter, more controlled. Like after a storm, only a gentle wave remained. I don't know, she admitted. Ask me tomorrow. Dumbledore approached, his face serious, but in his eyes gleamed something like pride. You've done something incredible, Sybill, he said quietly. You saved us all. Not I, she shook her head. We. Cassandra, the students. She looked at the four standing around the seal. What did you do? The seal? It's different, stronger. Theodore stepped forward, his head bowed. I corrected the runes. Celine saw where they were wrong. We worked together. 4 houses. Like the founders. He raised his eyes and in them were tears. Professor, I'm so sorry, I never thought. Sybill approached him, though her legs still trembled. She placed a hand on his shoulder. Theodore, she said gently, you made a mistake. A grave mistake. But you also corrected it. That's more than many can say. But you lost your gift. Because of me. I didn't lose it. I gave part. By choice. She smiled weakly. And perhaps that's the best thing that could have happened. I feared my gift so long. Now perhaps I can live with it. Not hide from it. McGonagall approached. Her stern face softened. You all need the hospital wing. Immediately. No objections. This time no one argued. Even Theodore, who always had something to say, simply nodded. They slowly left the chamber, leaving the seal behind. Now strengthened, guarded not only by the 4 founders' magic but by a 5th magic. The magic of one who'd seen through time, and given everything to protect the future. As they climbed stairs back to the castle, Sybill turned one last time. In the chamber's darkness the seal glowed with golden radiance, and for a moment, just a moment, it seemed to her the eye on the seal blinked. A farewell gesture. Or a promise that Cassandra was still here, still watching. Rest peacefully, Sybill thought. You've earned it. And in the depths of her mind, barely audible, came an answer. Not words but sensation. Warmth. Gratitude. Peace. The hospital wing was too bright after the dungeons. Darkness. Madame Pomfrey bustled around them all, her face concerned and furious simultaneously. You're all absolutely senseless, she declared, pouring healing potion into goblets. Going down to the dungeons, fighting dark magic. You could have died. But we didn't die. Edmund said this gently, accepting a goblet. That's no excuse. But her hands were tender, as she checked their pulses, looked in their eyes, examined for curses. Sybill sat on the bed furthest from the doors, watching Madame Pomfrey fuss over the students. Ivy was already falling asleep, exhausted by her ordeal. Celine held her hand, her own eyes heavy with fatigue. Edmund and Theodore sat nearby, speaking quietly, their voices too low to hear. Dumbledore sat in a chair by Sibyl's bed, his long beard resting on his chest, his eyes thoughtful. "Your gift," he said finally. "You said it changed. How exactly?" Sybill looked at her hands. The golden glow had already faded, but she still felt it there, beneath skin, in blood. "Quieter," she answered. "Before, visions came like a storm, suddenly, forcefully, unpredictably. Now it's more like a stream. I still see, but I can control it. Choose when to look, when to turn away." "That is a gift," Dumbledore smiled. "A true gift, not a curse." "Perhaps?" She paused. "Cassandra gave me something when she left. Part of her magic remained with me. Not her visions, but her wisdom, perhaps. Her understanding of how to live with the gift, not fear it. She was a wise woman. And very lonely. Yes, but now she's at peace. I feel it." Sybill looked at the headmaster. "Will the seal hold?" "With the fifth magic. With Lady Cassandra as part of it." Dumbledore nodded. "I'm confident it will. Perhaps not forever. Nothing lasts forever. But long enough. Much longer than it would have without her." "And the students corrected the runes?" "Yes, thanks to Miss Morrow." Dumbledore looked at Celine, now drowsing, her head resting on the edge of Ivy's bed. "She has a gift, doesn't she? Weak, but genuine." "Yes. She was hiding it, was afraid." "As you once did." Sybill smiled sadly. "Yes, as I did. Perhaps now I can help her. Show her the gift needn't be frightening. I think she would appreciate that." They sat in silence for several minutes, listening to Ivy's quiet snoring, Madame Pomfrey's muttering, distant sounds of the castle awakening to a new day. Finally Dumbledore rose, his long robes rustling. "Rest, Sybill," he said gently. "You've earned it, all of you." He left, his footsteps quiet on stone floor. Sybill leaned back on pillows, closed her eyes. Exhaustion rolled over her in a wave, but it was pleasant exhaustion. The sensation of something important done, that the price had been paid but not too high. She fell asleep without Sherry for the first time in 3 years, her dreams calm, without visions, without nightmares. Only the warmth of golden light, and the sensation of a hand holding hers. Not Cassandra's, but memory of Cassandra, a companion through darkness, who'd led her to light. Next morning Sybill woke to sunlight, streaming through the hospital wing's tall windows. She sat in bed, her body stiff, but not painful. Madame Pomfrey immediately appeared with a breakfast tray. "Eat," she commanded. "You lost much strength. You need to recover." Sybill ate slowly, watching the students wake one by one. Ivy first, her face fresher, healthier. Celine stretched, yawned, smiled, when she saw Ivy was well. Edmund and Theodore spoke quietly, their friendship seemingly strengthened by the ordeal. "Professor." Celine approached her bed, her light hair disheveled but eyes clear. I wanted to thank you for what you did." "I should thank you," Sybill smiled. "You showed your gift, saved us all." Celine blushed. "I've always feared it. Thought if anyone found out, they'd call me strange. Or worse. And now, I don't know. Perhaps it's not so frightening. If there's someone who understands. Someone like you." Sybill reached out, touched the girl's cheek. "If you ever want to talk about your gift, about visions, about living with it, come to me. I'm no expert. Goodness, I barely understand my own gift. But I understand fear. And loneliness. And I can help with that." Tears filled Celine's eyes, but she smiled. "Thank you," she whispered. The rest of the day passed in quiet recovery. Dumbledore visited again, reporting the seal was stable, that darkness showed no signs of breaking through. McGonagall came with tea and biscuits, her sternness hiding deep relief that everyone had survived. And in the evening, when Madame Pomfrey finally allowed them to leave, Sybill returned to her tower. She stopped by the Venetian mirror on the wall, the same one where she'd first seen Cassandra, looked at her own reflection. The woman gazing back was different. Not younger, not more beautiful, but freer, lighter, as though a burden she'd carried so long had finally lessened somewhat. She touched the mirror's surface, and for a moment it seemed she felt something. Not a voice, not a presence. Simply warmth. Gratitude. "Goodbye, Cassandra," she whispered. "Rest peacefully. You're free now. And so am I." The mirror didn't answer. But somewhere, deep beneath the castle, in the chamber with the seal, the golden eye blinked. And in the silence between worlds where time didn't exist, Lady Cassandra Windermere smiled. Finally. After 5 centuries. Finally she'd found purpose. Not in death, not in life, but in protection, in vigilance, in being what she'd always meant to be, a guardian against darkness. And somewhere, in another mirror, in another time, another seer looked into the future and wasn't afraid of what she saw.